At exactly 9:17 p.m., a tiny black girl stood in the snow, trembling, crying, and whispered to the most powerful billionaire in the city, "Sir, my mom hasn't woken up for 3 days." The man froze. He had closed billion-dollar deals that same day. But this wasn't business. It was life or death. She took his hand and said 3 words. "Show me now." What he found inside that broken house would change his entire life forever. Stay till the end. This story will break you, then heal you. If your heart already feels this, click like, subscribe, and stay with me. The snow was falling the way silence does, thick, heavy, unanswered. It covered the sidewalks, the rusted street signs, the broken fences, and forgotten corners of the city where hope had long ago packed its bags and left. It came down in slow spirals, like the world was trying to soften the cruelty of winter, but the cold was still merciless. Wind pushed icy needles against the faces of those who dared step outside, and most people didn't dare at all. Most people were safe. Most people were warm. Most people were not 10-year-old Jolie Weston. Her small legs trembled as she stood at the edge of the cracked sidewalk, hugging her own thin body for warmth. The coat she wore was 2 sizes too big, once belonged to her mother, and the sleeves swallowed her hands. Her backpack hung crookedly from one shoulder, the strap held together by loose threads and a small safety pin that had long begun to rust. Snow clung to her curls, turning the tight strands into tiny white crowns that sparkled under the streetlight above her. Anyone who saw her would have thought she was just another lost child of the winter. But Jolie wasn't lost. She was on a mission. Her brown eyes, wide and glistening, were not shining because of the cold alone. They shone with fear, with hunger, with 3 long days of unanswered prayers. 3 days since her mother, Jennifer Weston, had closed her eyes on the couch and never opened them again. It had started on a quiet evening, the kind of evening where the world moved slowly, as if it were tired too. Jennifer had returned home from her cleaning job at a downtown office building, her body swaying slightly as she stepped through the door. She forced a smile when she saw Jolie sitting on the floor with her worn-out picture books. "Hey, sunshine," Jennifer had whispered. Her voice was softer than usual, like a candle about to go out. "You're back, Mommy," Jolie had said, rushing to hug her tightly. "Did you eat today?" Jennifer paused. That pause lasted only a second, but Jolie felt it. Felt it like a tremor in the ground before an earthquake. "Yes, baby." Her mother lied gently. "I'm just tired." She had walked to the couch, sat down, and leaned her head back. That was the last time Jolie heard her mother speak. At first, Jolie thought she was just sleeping, the deep kind of sleep that came after long days and longer months. She made her mother a blanket from the one good quilt they owned. She placed her small hand on Jennifer's chest to feel her breathing. It was faint, but it was there. So Jolie waited, all through the night, and the next morning, and the next. But Jennifer did not wake up. No movement, no cough, no hungry stomach calling out, no scolding for forgetting to wash the dishes. Just silence, and the slow, broken tick-tick-tick of the old clock on the wall, the one whose hands often got stuck at random hours, as if even time didn't care enough to keep going in their apartment. Jolie had shaken her mother's shoulder gently. "Mommy, please wake up." Nothing. She had tried singing the way her mother used to sing to her, when the lights went out and the darkness got too loud. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," her voice cracked halfway through. Jennifer never stirred. On the second day, the hunger came like a sharp attacker, curling in Jolie's stomach until she doubled over on the floor. She checked the cabinets. Empty. She opened the fridge, just a half-empty bottle of water, and an old piece of bread that had turned hard as a rock. She broke a tiny piece from the edge and chewed slowly, every bite reminding her that something was terribly, terribly wrong. On the third day, fear became stronger than hunger. Her mother was still silent, cold to the touch, but not cold like the snow outside, colder in a way Jolie couldn't understand. That's when she remembered the memory. A month ago, another blackout, another night with no electricity. Jennifer had sat beside her on the mattress they shared and stroked her hair. "If anything ever happens to me, Jolie, find someone important. Someone kind. Don't be scared. Jolie had laughed then, thinking her mother was just being dramatic. Nothing is going to happen to you, Mommy. Jennifer had smiled at her, a tired, beautiful smile filled with unspoken pain. Still, promise me. And Jolie had nodded. I promise. That promise now burned like fire inside her chest. So on the third day, with her stomach empty and her hands numb, Jolie opened the crooked front door of their apartment and stepped into the snow. It swallowed her shoes almost immediately. Each step was heavy, slow, painful, but she walked anyway, down the broken stairs, across the silent road, past dark houses and closed shops. She walked, searching for someone important, someone kind, someone who looked like they could stop the darkness that had swallowed her home. Then she saw it, a black luxury car, so polished it looked almost unreal in her world of rust and decay, slowly pulled to a stop at the corner of her street. Its bright headlights cut through the snow like two eyes burning in the night. The driver's door opened. A tall man in a long, dark coat stepped out. He moved with a calm, powerful confidence that made the freezing air around him seem afraid to touch him. His hair was neatly styled, touched with silver at the sides. His face was stern, sharp, the face of someone who made decisions that changed cities, that moved money, that shaped futures. This was not a man from her world. This was not a man who ever looked at children like her. This was someone important. Her someone important. Jolie did not think. She did not hesitate. She ran. Her tiny feet slipped on the icy ground, and she almost fell. But she caught herself and ran harder, her hands reaching out until they clutched the edge of his heavy coat. The man froze in surprise. "Whoa!" he started, looking down at the trembling child holding him like she was clinging to the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Snowflakes settled between them. The world around them seemed to blur. Jolie looked up at him with desperate eyes. Tears streaked down her cheeks, mixing with melting snow. Her lips were blue from the cold, but her voice was clear. "Please, sir," she sobbed. "My mom hasn't woken up for 3 days." The world seemed to stop breathing. The man's name was Mark Henry, billionaire CEO of one of the largest real estate investment firms in the country. A man who owned buildings taller than her entire neighborhood. A man who was feared in boardrooms and respected in governments. A man used to problem solve with numbers and contracts, not with the cries of a little girl. For a second, his bodyguard made a move to step forward. "Sir, careful." Mark lifted one hand slightly, stopping him. His eyes never left Jolie. When he looked down at her, he didn't see dirty clothes. He didn't see poverty. He didn't see inconvenience. He saw panic. He saw fear. He saw a battlefield. He saw a child standing alone at the edge of life and death. And something inside his chest, something long buried, cracked open. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. Jolie's tiny fingers tightened around his coat as if afraid he might disappear. "At our house. She won't move. She won't talk." Mark glanced down the empty street, then back at the child who had just stepped into his life without warning. The wind howled between the buildings. Snow fell heavier. Time stood still. Finally, he nodded once. "Show me now," he said. And without another word, Jolie turned, already taking her first step back into the storm, believing with the simple, desperate faith of a child that this man might just be the miracle her mother had sent for. Behind them, the driver whispered uneasily, "Sir, this isn't a safe part of town." But Mark Henry did not turn back. He followed the little girl into the snow, and the night held its breath. If you were Mark Henry right now, would you follow her into dark street? Comment yes or a no. Like and share this story if your heart already feels connected to Jolie. Subscribe to see what happens inside the house, because what Mark finds, it will change his life forever. Jolie walked ahead through the snow, her tiny boots filling and overfilling with ice-cold water. Every step made a soft, wet sound as the soaked fabric clung to her freezing skin. But she didn't slow down. The pain didn't matter. The cold didn't matter. All that mattered was her mother. Mark Henry followed behind her. His polished shoes, custom-made, imported leather from Italy, were now soaked, stained, ruined. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He barely even noticed the discomfort, the icy water seeping through the soles. His mind moved faster than his body, racing through questions. How long has she been like this? Why hasn't anyone helped her? Why is a child alone in a storm? The little girl occasionally turned around, just to make sure he was still there. Each time she saw him, a tiny bit of hope sparked in her tired eyes, a light that kept her moving forward through the biting wind. They walked for nearly 10 minutes through an area that seemed forgotten by the world. No streetlights, no footprints except their own. Houses hunched under the weight of years of neglect. Curtains ripped, windows boarded, paint peeling in large, desperate flakes as if the buildings themselves were trying to escape their own skin. Finally, Jolie stopped in front of a narrow, sagging structure leaning slightly to the left, as though exhausted by its existence. "This is it," she said in a barely audible whisper. Mark looked at the house. It did not look like a home. It looked tired, like it had spent years apologizing for existing. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips that fluttered gently in the cold wind. The windows, some cracked and others taped clumsily together, trembled as snow tapped against the glass. The small front porch sagged painfully under the weight of time. One of the steps had collapsed inward, leaving a jagged opening where it should have been. The door hung off one hinge. Mark hesitated for only a second, not out of fear, but disbelief. Someone lives here with a child? Jolie pushed the door open. It creaked like an old whisper, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that twisted around them. Inside, the world had stopped. No heat, no lights, no hum of life. Just quiet, the suffocating quiet of a place that hadn't known warmth in a long time. The living room was frozen in the past. A faded carpet, worn down to threads in certain places. A tiny wooden table holding an empty glass and a single wilted flower. A small stack of school books held together with thick rubber bands. A broken lamp on the floor near the couch, its bulb twisted and blackened from repeated use. And in the middle of it all, on an old, flattened couch wrapped in a thin, fraying blanket, lay Jennifer Weston. Still, her skin was pale, almost gray under the dim winter light that filtered into the cracked window. Her lips were dry, slightly parted. Her breathing was so faint it was almost impossible to see. Her hair, once thick and beautiful, now lay tangled and lifeless across the pillow beneath her head. Mark didn't think. He dropped to his knees beside the couch, his expensive coat pooling around him on the dirty floor. His fingers pressed urgently against the side of her neck. A pulse. Faint, but there. His chest released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "She's alive," he muttered, mostly to himself. Behind him, Jolie let out a tiny, trembling sob of relief. "I knew it," she whispered. Mark's voice transformed. Gone was the businessman. Gone was the billionaire. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, stronger. "Command. Call 911. Now!" His voice cracked through the frozen room like thunder. His driver, standing nervous in the open doorway, pulled his phone instantly. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice echoed through the line. "This is Mark Henry," the driver began, but Mark grabbed the phone from his hand. "A woman is unconscious and in critical condition at..." He looked around, trying to find some identification. No address posted. 2-story, collapsing building, northwest end of Rosehart Street behind the abandoned bakery. He glanced back at Jennifer's face, then added, "Send an ambulance." "Now." "She's been unresponsive for days." "Understood, sir. Stay on the line." Mark dropped the phone on the carpet, switching on speaker mode, and turned his attention fully back to Jennifer. He unwrapped the thin blanket from her body, checking her posture. Her limbs were stiff, not with death, but with long periods of stillness. He gently repositioned her head to ensure her airway was open. Tiny signs jumped out to him. The slight trembling, the clammy skin, the dry cracks on her lips. Dehydration, severe weakness, possible diabetic shock. His mind raced through medical memory pulled from a long-forgotten survival course he once took after a kidnapping threat years ago. He remembered exactly what the instructor had taught. Cold can mimic death. Never assume. Always respond. "Jolie!" he said gently but firmly without turning around. "Sweetheart, look at me." She stepped closer, her shaking hands clutching her backpack straps. "Did your mommy eat in the last few days?" Jolie thought hard. "She said she wasn't hungry," she whispered. "She said she was tired." "Did she take any medicine?" Jolie nodded slowly. "Sometimes." But there wasn't much left. A sharp, invisible knife carved through Mark's chest. She chose to feed her child instead of herself. He removed his coat and draped it over Jennifer, not for warmth alone, but for dignity. Then he gently lifted her arm, checking for reactions. Nothing, but still breathing, still fighting, still here. "Stay with me, Jennifer," he murmured under his breath, a prayer he didn't even realize he was speaking. Jolie watched everything in silence from the doorway, as if afraid her presence might break the delicate moment. Her small fingers trembled constantly, her teeth chattering as the cold crept deeper into her bones. Mark noticed. Without hesitation, he reached behind him and took Jolie's hands, wrapping both of them inside his own. His hands were massive compared to hers. Strong, warm, safe. "You did the right thing," he told her quietly. "You saved her life." Her eyes lifted, filled with confusion and flickering hope. "I did?" she asked. "Yes," he said with certainty. "You were brave when most adults wouldn't be." In the distance, sirens began to cry through the storm, a sound like angels rushing toward war. Jolie turned her head toward the doorway. "They're coming," she whispered. "Yes, they're coming for your mommy," Mark replied. Suddenly her body collapsed forward, and she buried her face into his shoulder, breaking down in quiet, desperate sobs she had been holding inside for 3 terrifying days. "I didn't know what to do. I thought she was sleeping forever," she cried. Mark wrapped his arms around her gently, like he had done this his entire life. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," he whispered into her hair. "You found help." Outside, blue and red lights painted the snow in streaks of fire and ice. Paramedics burst through the broken doorway moments later, stepping carefully into the fragile home. "Where's the patient?" one of them asked urgently. "Here," Mark said, stepping back to give him space, but not stepping away from Jolie. They placed Jennifer on a stretcher, attaching monitors, oxygen, for fluids. The small screen flashed rapidly as it registered her weak but fighting heartbeat. "She's in severe condition," one of the medics said to the other. "Probably hasn't eaten or taken medication for days." Jolie clung to Mark's arm. "Don't take her away," she pleaded. Mark knelt down to her, eye level again. "They're not taking her away, Jolie," he said softly. "They're taking her to save her." Her lip trembled. "Can I go with her?" Mark looked at the lead medic. "There's space for one," the man replied, "but it's going to be rough." "I'm coming," Mark said instantly. The paramedics exchanged confused glances. "You're a family member?" one asked. Mark looked at Jolie, then back at them. "In this moment," he said firmly, "I'm the only family she has." When they wheeled Jennifer out into the storm, Jolie ran beside the stretcher, holding her mother's cold fingers while Mark walked on the other side, his shoulder absorbing the falling snow like armor. The stretcher slid into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and inside, as the engine roared to life, Jolie finally allowed herself one tiny breath of hope. But neither she nor Mark noticed it yet. The past they were leaving behind was not as dangerous as the future that waited ahead. Would you have followed a strange child into a dangerous, broken home to save a stranger? Comment I would have been afraid. If this part made your heart beat faster, like and share it right now. And subscribe. The hospital doors burst open with sharp hiss, and the ambulance stretcher rolled inside at a speed that made Jolie dizzy. White fluorescent lights flooded the hallway, blinding her tired eyes after hours in the dim, frozen house. Voices echoed around her, urgent, fast, professional. Female mid-30s, unresponsive for an estimated 72 hours. Blood pressure dropping, possible diabetic coma. Jennifer Weston was lifted from the stretcher and transferred onto a hospital bed in seconds. Tubes were attached. A mask lowered over her face. Monitors began their relentless, beeping chorus. a mechanical heartbeat that filled the air with both terror and hope. Jolie stood frozen, her small hand locked tightly around Mark's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered. "Mommy, I'm here." But Jennifer did not respond. A nurse gently bent down in front of her. "Sweetheart, we need to take your mom to the ICU now, okay? They're going to help her get better." "Can I come with her?" Jolie asked, terror rising in her throat. The nurse hesitated. Mark stepped forward. "She goes wherever her mother goes," he said, firm but calm. "I'll handle the paperwork." The double doors to the ICU closed behind Jennifer, leaving Jolie standing in a world too big and too cold for a little girl to understand. And then there was silence, a silence more painful than the snowstorm. Hospital waiting rooms had a way of draining life from everything. The pale green walls, the humming vending machine in the corner, the stiff chairs that felt like punishment, the smell of antiseptic that clung to clothes and skin no matter how long you stayed. But Mark did not leave. He ignored the vibration of his phone in his pocket. One call, then two, then 10. Messages from his assistants, his board, his lawyers. Words like urgent meeting, contract, loss, millions lighting up his screen. None of it mattered. Everything he owned, every building, every investment, every signed deal faded into the background next to one small girl clinging to his side. Jolie sat curled up on the chair beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. Her backpack rested at her feet, the same one she'd been carrying when she found him. Finally, exhaustion overtook fear. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her head gently leaned against his arm. Mark stiffened at first. He wasn't used to children. He avoided them. Even the wealthy families who once begged him to attend charity events with their kids. He always declined. But now, he slowly lifted his other arm and wrapped it around her, shielding her from a world. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel alone in the silence. Hours passed. Doctors and nurses went in and out of the ICU. Beeping machines echoed down the hallway like a countdown. Mark watched each one, his jaw tightening, his mind trying to calculate something this time that money could not solve. Finally, a nurse approached quietly. "She's stabilized for now," the woman said softly, "but she's still in critical condition. We ran blood tests, and her glucose levels are dangerously high. She's in severe diabetic shock." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Diabetic shock?" he repeated. The nurse nodded. "Type 1 diabetes from the looks of her medical history. But she hasn't been taking insulin regularly. Maybe weeks, possibly months." A cold heaviness sank into Mark's stomach. "She didn't collapse 3 days ago," the nurse added in a whisper. "This has been building inside her for a long time." Mark turned to look at Jolie sleeping beside him, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. This wasn't just illness. This was poverty, fighting against the body and almost winning. Jennifer hadn't been careless. She had been sacrificing. While Jolie ate, Jennifer starved. While Jolie went to school, Jennifer skipped her medicine. While Jolie slept, Jennifer's body was slowly shutting down. Every skipped dose, every ignored symptom, every silent, painful night had been an act of love disguised as survival. Mark clenched his fists. The world he had conquered with contracts and power had failed this woman and her child in the cruelest way. No one had knocked on their door. No system had reached out. No neighbors had intervened. Only a 10-year-old girl and her courage stood between life and death. Jolie suddenly stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Is she waking up?" she asked sleepily, scanning the hallway. Mark crouched down beside her, so their faces were level. "Not yet," he said softly, "but the doctors are helping her. She's fighting just like you." Her lip trembled. "Is she going to die too?" The word too hung in the air like a broken bell. Too, as though death had always been expected, as though life was optional. Mark felt something tear open inside his chest. "Not today," he said firmly, his voice filled with power that echoed deeper than any command he had ever given in the boardroom. "Not on my watch." Tears filled Jolie's eyes, but she nodded. "I tried to wake her up," she whispered. "I sang her favorite song. I held her hand. I told her it was time for school, but she wouldn't open her eyes." He stroked her hair gently. You did everything a hero could do. She squinted up at him. I'm not a hero. Yes, he replied without hesitation. You are. A doctor finally came out of the ICU, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a gentle face. Mr. Henry, he asked. Mark stood. Yes. You can't go in yet, but I wanted to inform you of the situation personally. Jennifer Weston is in a diabetic coma. Her body has been running on fumes for a long time. What saved her was the fact that you found her when you did. If it had been one more day, she wouldn't be here anymore. The words hit Jolie like thunder. She almost died, she whispered. The doctor nodded slowly. Very nearly. Jolie's hand shot out and clasped onto Mark's. Her fingers trembled violently. She didn't want me to be alone, she cried. That's why she kept fighting, isn't it? Mark could barely choke the words out. Yes, she was fighting for you. Hours melted into night. Night melted into early morning. Still, Mark did not leave. He ordered food neither of them ate, brought in blankets, refused to sit anywhere but within sight of the ICU doors. On multiple occasions, nurses tried to encourage him to go home, rest, change his clothes. I'm not going anywhere, he said, because leaving now would feel like abandoning a second chance at life. Finally, the doors of the ICU opened. You may see her for a few minutes, the nurse said gently. One at a time. Jolie's legs shook as she stood. I want to go first, she whispered. Mark squeezed her hand reassuringly. I'm right behind you. Inside the room, Jennifer lay covered in clean blankets, her pale skin now touched by color again, tubes connected to her arms and nose. The sound of the monitor echoed steadily, like a quiet promise. Jolie shuffled to her bedside and gently touched her mother's hand. Mommy, she whispered, I brought help. Mark stepped behind her, watching in silence. Slowly, Jennifer's fingers twitched. Then again, and finally, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was weak, confused, but when her eyes landed on Jolie's face, the faintest smile formed. My baby, she breathed. A nurse gasped quietly. Jolie burst into sobs, grabbing her mother's hands with both of hers. I told you to wake up, she cried. I told you I'd find help. Jennifer's eyes lifted slightly beyond Jolie. To Mark, confusion turned to recognition. You? She whispered. I'm the stranger your daughter trusted. Mark replied quietly. Her lips trembled with gratitude. Thank you for saving my child, she murmured. Mark shook his head. No, he said softly. She saved you. She saved us both. And in that moment, standing in a sterile hospital room filled with machines and quiet beeping, something impossible happened. A family was born out of nothing, and fate had only just begun to write their next chapter. Do you believe Jolie saved her mother by destiny or pure courage? Comment destiny or courage. If this moment touched your heart, 2 days later, Jennifer still hadn't woken up. Her body fought quietly, stubbornly, from a place deeper than sleep. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping. Nurses changed shifts. Doctors reviewed charts. Hours turned to long, silent margins between hope and fear. But Jennifer Weston remained unconscious. And in the cold logic of the system, unconscious meant absent. It meant unavailable. And worse, it meant replaceable. That was when the social worker arrived. She didn't come with warmth. She didn't come with sympathy. She didn't come with time. She came with rules. Clipboard tucked against her sharp suit. Hair pulled back into a tight bun. Eyes scanned the room like she was inspecting a damaged product instead of shattered family. Her heels clicked against the hospital floor as she approached Mark and Jolie in the waiting area. Mr. Mark Henry? She asked, not kindly, formally. Yes, he replied, standing. She glanced at Jolie, still wrapped in the oversized hospital blanket, still clinging to Mark's hand like a lifeline. Then she looked back at him. I'm Karen Holt, Child Protective Services. Since the mother has been unconscious for days, and there is no biological father or registered guardian listed in her records, she looked down at her clipboard. The child will need to be placed in temporary foster care effective immediately. The word foster dropped into the room like broken glass. Jolie's grip tightened around Mark's fingers. "No," she whispered. "Please don't take me. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay with my mommy." Her eyes filled with tears so quickly it was as if fear itself lived inside them. The social worker barely flinched. "I understand this is upsetting," she said, her voice calm but distant. "But we have procedures." "Procedures?" Mark repeated sharply. "It's for the child's safety. Until her mother recovers or a suitable biological guardian is found, she will be placed in state care." Jolie burst into sobs. "I don't know anyone else." "Please, sir, please," she cried, burying her face into Mark's side. The sound of her crying echoed through the hallway, drawing the attention of nurses, doctors, passing strangers. But no one interfered. No one stepped forward, except one man. Mark Henry stepped between Jolie and the social worker like a protective fortress. "She goes nowhere without me." Karen tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "And who are you to her?" she asked coolly. There was a beat of silence. One of Mark's assistants, who had just arrived with new clothes, leaned forward slightly, his voice tense. "This is Mr. Mark Henry." The air changed. Conversation stopped. Footsteps froze. Whispers began. The social worker's eyes widened just slightly for the first time. "The Mark Henry?" she asked. "Of Henry Holdings?" "I don't care what you call me," Mark replied. "Right now, I'm the man standing between a child and abandonment." "You don't have legal guardianship," Karen said, tightening her grip on the clipboard. "Not yet," he answered calmly. "But I will. And until you can prove that she will be safer anywhere else, she stays with me." "You can't just take a child because you feel sorry," Karen argued. "This isn't charity, Mr. Henry. This is a law." Mark stepped closer, his shoulders squared. "And the law is supposed to protect children, not traumatize them," he said in a low, deadly quiet tone. "This child just saved her mother's life. And now you think your paperwork deserves her more than I do." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Mark continued before she could. "You want procedure? Fine. We'll do it your way. Call your supervisor. Call your director. Call the governor, if you must. But no one touches her." The tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Jolie peeked up at him through tear-filled eyes. "You won't let them take me?" she whispered. "Not in this lifetime," he replied softly. "It took 3 hours, 6 phone calls, 2 senior social services directors, a hospital administrator, and 1 very uncomfortable appearance from a lawyer working on behalf of the state. At the end of it all, there was silence. Then a new form was handed to Mark. Temporary emergency guardianship. Approved. Karen handed it over, her voice less firm now. "Until her mother regains consciousness and is deemed fully capable, she will remain under your care." Jolie stared up at Mark, not understanding the paperwork. Only the outcome. "She can stay?" she asked. Mark knelt down in front of her, holding her little shoulders. "Yes, you're safe. You're staying with me." She threw her arms around his neck, crying into his coat. A man who had stood in boardrooms unshaken by million-dollar deals now felt his heart break and heal all at once. That night, he didn't take her back to the cold hospital waiting room. He took her home. To his home, a towering mansion on the edge of the city. Walls of glass and stone. Gates guarded by cameras and silence. A place that had once felt like power, but had never felt like warmth. Until now, the staff watched in confusion as he walked in carrying a child wrapped in a hospital blanket. He didn't explain. He just said, "Prepare the guest room. A real bed, soft sheets, warm bath, soup." Then he paused. "No, prepare my bedroom. I'll take the guest room." They stared at him. He had never given away anything in that house. Until her. Jolie stepped carefully into the enormous space, her eyes wide at the chandeliers, the staircase, the velvet couches. "Is this a hotel?" she whispered. He knelt down again. "No," he said gently. "It's just a house that's been empty for too long." A maid helped her into warm pajamas. For the first time in days, Jolie took a real bath. Warm water wrapped her skin like a hug. When she came out, her tight curls were soft, her face clean, her eyes slowly losing their fear. Mark sat on the edge of the huge bed as she crawled under the blankets. "These sheets are nicer than clouds," she murmured. He chuckled softly. "Clouds don't appreciate them." "You do." She stared at the ceiling. "Will my mommy know where I am?" she asked. "Yes." His voice softened. "And when she wakes up, she'll come here too." Finally, after 3 days of terror, hunger, cold, and silence, sleep found her again, and she slept peacefully. A deep, childlike sleep. A sleep free of fear. Mark stood in the doorway long after she drifted off. He had spent his life building walls. Walls of wealth, walls of power, walls of distance. And yet, a little girl with no money, no safety, no protection, had broken through them without effort. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he once thought he owned. He didn't own anything. Not really. But tonight, he had been entrusted with something far more valuable than stocks, properties, or profits. A life, a child, a future. He whispered to the silent room, "I won't fail you." And in the distance, police lights flashed. Sirens echoed. The city continued to rush. But inside that house, time had finally slowed. For the first time, Mark Henry didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like something more important. A protector, a guardian, a family. If you believe Mark Henry made the right choice, comment "protect her." If Jolie deserves a safe, happy life, hit like and share this story. And subscribe now, because something unexpected is about to happen inside Mark's mansion that no amount of money can control. 2 days later, Jennifer still hadn't woken up. Her body fought quietly, stubbornly, from a place deeper than sleep. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping. Nurses changed shifts. Doctors reviewed charts. Hours turned to long, silent margins between hope and fear. But Jennifer Weston remained unconscious. And in the cold logic of the system, unconscious meant absent. It meant unavailable. And worse, it meant replaceable. That was when the social worker arrived. She didn't come with warmth. She didn't come with sympathy. She didn't come with time. She came with rules. Clipboard tucked against her sharp suit. Hair pulled back into a tight bun. Eyes scanned the room like she was inspecting a damaged product instead of shattered family. Her heels clicked against the hospital floor as she approached Mark and Jolie in the waiting area. "Mr. Mark Henry?" she asked, not kindly, formally. "Yes," he replied, standing. She glanced at Jolie, still wrapped in the oversized hospital blanket, still clinging to Mark's hand like a lifeline. Then she looked back at him. "I'm Karen Holt, Child Protective Services. Since the mother has been unconscious for days, and there is no biological father or registered guardian listed in her records, she looked down at her clipboard. The child will need to be placed in temporary foster care effective immediately." The word foster dropped into the room like broken glass. Jolie's grip tightened around Mark's fingers. "No," she whispered. "Please don't take me. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay with my mommy." Her eyes filled with tears so quickly it was as if fear itself lived inside them. The social worker barely flinched. "I understand this is upsetting," she said, her voice calm but distant. "But we have procedures." "Procedures?" Mark repeated sharply. "It's for the child's safety. Until her mother recovers, or a suitable biological guardian is found, she will be placed in state care." Jolie burst into sobs. "I don't know anyone else." "Please, sir, please," she cried, burying her face into Mark's side. The sound of her crying echoed to the hallway, drawing the attention of nurses, doctors, passing strangers. But no one interfered. No one stepped forward, except one man. Mark Henry stepped between Jolie and the social worker, like a protective fortress. "She goes nowhere without me." Karen tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "And who are you to her?" she asked coolly. There was a beat of silence. One of Mark's assistants, who had just arrived with new clothes, leaned forward slightly, his voice tense. "This is Mr. Mark Henry." The air changed. Conversation stopped. Footsteps froze. Whispers began. The social worker's eyes widened just slightly for the first time. "The Mark Henry?" she asked. "Of Henry Holdings?" "I don't care what you call me," Mark replied. "Right now, I'm the man standing between a child and abandonment. You don't have legal guardianship, Karen said, tightening her grip on the clipboard. Not yet, he answered calmly. But I will. And until you can prove that she will be safer anywhere else, she stays with me. You can't just take a child because you feel sorry, Karen argued. This isn't charity, Mr. Henry. This is a law. Mark stepped closer, his shoulders squared. And the law is supposed to protect children, not traumatize them, he said in a low, deadly quiet tone. This child just saved her mother's life. And now you think your paperwork deserves her more than I do. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Mark continued before she could. You want procedure? Fine. We'll do it your way. Call your supervisor. Call your director. Call the governor if you must. But no one touches her. The tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Jolie peeked up at him through tear-filled eyes. You won't let them take me? She whispered. Not in this lifetime. He replied softly. It took 3 hours. 6 phone calls. 2 senior social services directors. A hospital administrator. And 1 very uncomfortable appearance from a lawyer working on behalf of the state. At the end of it all, there was silence. Then a new form was handed to Mark. Temporary emergency guardianship. Approved. Karen handed it over, her voice less firm now. Until her mother regains consciousness and is deemed fully capable, she will remain under your care. Jolie stared up at Mark, not understanding the paperwork. Only the outcome. She can stay, she asked. Mark knelt down in front of her, holding her little shoulders. Yes, you're safe. You're staying with me. She threw her arms around his neck, crying into his coat. A man who had stood in boardrooms unshaken by million-dollar deals now felt his heart break and heal all at once. That night, he didn't take her back to the cold hospital waiting room. He took her home. To his home, a towering mansion on the edge of the city. Walls of glass and stone. Gates guarded by cameras and silence. A place that had once felt like power, but had never felt like warmth. Until now, the staff watched in confusion as he walked in carrying a child wrapped in a hospital blanket. He didn't explain. He just said, prepare the guest room, a real bed, soft sheets, warm bath, soup. Then he paused. No, prepare my bedroom. I'll take the guest room. They stared at him. He had never given away anything in that house. Until her. Jolie stepped carefully into the enormous space, her eyes wide at the chandeliers, the staircase, the velvet couches. Is this a hotel? She whispered. He knelt down again. No, he said gently. It's just a house that's been empty for too long. A maid helped her into warm pajamas. For the first time in days, Jolie took a real bath. Warm water wrapped her skin like a hug. When she came out, her tight curls were soft, her face clean, her eyes slowly losing their fear. Mark sat on the edge of the huge bed as she crawled under the blankets. These sheets are nicer than clouds, she murmured. He chuckled softly. Clouds don't appreciate them. You do. She stared at the ceiling. Will my mommy know where I am? She asked. Yes. His voice softened. And when she wakes up, she'll come here too. Finally, after 3 days of terror, hunger, cold, and silence, sleep found her again, and she slept peacefully. A deep, childlike sleep, a sleep free of fear. Mark stood in the doorway long after she drifted off. He had spent his life building walls. Walls of wealth, walls of power, walls of distance. And yet, a little girl with no money, no safety, no protection, had broken through them without effort. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he once thought he owned. He didn't own anything. Not really. But tonight, he had been entrusted with something far more valuable than stocks, properties, or profits. A life, a child, a future. He whispered to the silent room, I won't fail you. And in the distance, police lights flashed. Sirens echoed. The city continued to rush. But inside that house, time had finally slowed. For the first time, Mark Henry didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like something more important. A protector, a guardian, a family. If you believe Mark Henry made the right choice, comment protect her. If Jolie deserves a safe, happy life. hit like and share this story. And subscribe now. Days turned into weeks. Outside, winter started to loosen its grip on the city. Snow retreated from sidewalks. Ice dripped from rooftops in slow, apologetic drops. The world began to breathe again. But something much deeper was changing inside the walls of Mark Henry's mansion, and it had nothing to do with spring. While Jennifer Weston fought her silent battle in a hospital bed miles away, Jolie Weston was unknowingly rebuilding a broken heart inside the most powerful man in the city. She didn't use tools. She didn't use therapy. She didn't use money. She used presence. She used innocence. She used love. Every morning, she woke up before the sun. She would creep out of the enormous guest bed that had now become hers, walking softly down the long marble hallway with her tiny bare feet. At first, the staff thought she was lost, but she never was. She was always headed to one place, Mark's room. She'd push the heavy wooden door open and climb up on the massive bed where a man who once owned the world slept like a lonely child. "Good morning, Mr. Mark," she'd whisper, tugging his sleeve. He would open one eye, confused, then soften instantly when he saw her. "You sleepwalking again, Miss Weston?" he murmured. "You said never to be scared when waking up," she replied sheepishly. He sat up slowly, and she crawled into his arms. "I had another dream that my mom was walking again," she said. He pressed his forehead to hers. "She will, and I'll be there when she does." Every word he spoke to her felt like a promise to himself. A promise he didn't even know he was making. The boardroom that became a playground. On the third week, Mark decided to bring Jolie to his corporate office building for the first time. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her behind anymore. The security team froze in shock when they saw her walk beside him, holding his hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The same hand that had signed billion-dollar deals now carried a tiny pink backpack. He watched the employees' faces change as they stared at the child beside him. This wasn't the cold CEO they knew. This was a different man. Inside the glass executive boardroom, filled with long dark tables, golden pens, and polished floors, Jolie climbed up into the massive leather chair at the head of the table. "This must be the king's chair," she said, spinning in slow circles. The executive stood frozen in silence. Mark cleared his throat. "Everybody, this is Miss Jolie Weston. She's my guest, and from today, she is welcome everywhere I am welcome." There was awkwardness, surprise, then smiles. Jolie pulled a box of crayons from her bag and spread them across the table. "These lines are too boring," she complained, looking at their company's printed digital logo on the screen. She took a red crayon and began to redraw the symbol, added curves, added color, added a tiny heart at one corner. Mark watched, speechless. For the first time, his corporation didn't feel like a machine. It felt like a living thing. People leaned over her shoulder. What had once been a formal boardroom meeting turned into laughter, wonder, protection. And when she slid the paper in front of Mark and asked, "Is this how you make something better?" he felt something twist warmly in his chest. "Yes," he whispered. "That is exactly how you make something better." A chef's lesson from a child. Later that week, Mark's private chefs prepared a 7-course gourmet breakfast, plated as if for royalty. Jolie took one look at it and frowned. "This doesn't look like food," she said. "It looks like pictures." One of the chefs stiffened. "Miss, this is imported French." She slid past him and reached into the kitchen cabinets, pulling out a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread. "This is how my mommy makes it," she announced proudly. 2 pieces, thick butter, crunchy edges, and a little honey on top. The chefs looked at Mark, offended. Mark simply nodded. "Let her show you." 15 minutes later, Jolie presented a simple, golden sandwich. He took one bite, and something he hadn't felt in years returned. Home. Tears burned behind his eyes. "Best meal I've had in my life," he said. The chefs exchanged confused looks. It wasn't the flavor. It was the feeling, the prayer that he never knew he needed. That evening, as they sat at the long dining table together, Jolie looked up at the crystal lights hanging above them. "Don't you pray before eating?" she asked softly. Mark froze. I don't know how to, he admitted for the first time in years. She climbed onto her knees, taking his hands like a tiny teacher holding a student's. Well, my mommy says you just say thank you even when things are hard. She closed her eyes. Dear God, thank you for keeping my mommy alive. Thank you for Mr. Mark. Please heal my mommy and make him not lonely anymore. Amen. He didn't pull his hands away. He didn't laugh. He didn't question it. Something invisible in his chest cracked open. For the first time since his parents died as a young boy, he prayed, not for money, not for power, but for people. The confession that broke him apart. One night, as rain hit the massive glass windows, Jolie sat curled beside him on the couch. You're sad too, aren't you? She asked. He swallowed hard. What makes you think that? Because I see the same quiet in your eyes that I see when my mommy is sleeping, she said. That quiet means something is hurting underneath. Words he had never said to anyone whispered out of his mouth. My parents died in a car crash when I was 12. After that, I decided love was too expensive. So I spent my life buying everything else. She looked up at him with complete certainty. Love is free, she said. It only costs you courage. A child had just outsmarted a billionaire, and it destroyed him in the most beautiful way. He pulled her close, holding her like a man who had been lost and finally found his way home. The realization, that night, after she fell asleep again in her warm bed, Mark walked through the silent halls of his mansion. He stopped at the grand staircase and looked around. The art, the statues, the trophies, the wealth, it all looked smaller now, meaningless without laughter, meaningless without little footsteps echoing through the halls. He finally understood the painful, beautiful truth. He had built an empire of steel and stone, but he had never built a family. And yet, a poor little girl from a broken house in the snow had built one for him in just a few weeks. Not through money, not through contracts, but through love, trust, and quiet, brave presence. He knelt beside her bed one last time that night and whispered, I don't know how long you'll be here, Jolie, but while you are, you're not a guest. You're my family. Outside, the last of the winter snow fell silently. But inside that house, a new spring had already begun. If Jolie changed your heart the way she changed his. Comment. She healed him. Like plus share this story and subscribe now. Because Jennifer's eyes are about to open for the first time and what she sees shocks her completely. On the 19th day, something changed. It was subtle at first. So small that nobody would have noticed it. Not the machines, not the doctors rushing down the hallways, not the nurses switching shifts, not even the anxious families praying at the ends of other beds. But Mark Henry noticed. He always noticed the tiny things now. Because for 3 weeks, his entire world had shrunk to the size of one hospital room. Jennifer Weston lay there, pale and unmoving, hooked up to quiet machines that whispered soft mechanical beeps into the air. Her body looked like it didn't belong to her anymore, as though life itself had stepped away and forgotten. But Mark had never forgotten. He sat in the chair beside her bed every day, suit discarded for comfortable clothes, phone turned off, business meetings canceled without explanation. In those silent hours, he had learned the rhythm of her breathing. He had learned the tiny changes in her skin color. He had learned the sound of hope. And then it happened. Jennifer's fingers twitched. At first, he thought his grief was playing tricks on him. That loneliness was inventing miracles. But then her fingers moved again. Doctor, Mark's voice whispered, hoarse with disbelief. A nurse hurried in, then another, then a doctor. Did you just move your fingers, Jennifer? The doctor asked. Seconds passed. Then a slow, trembling movement. Again, for the first time in 19 days, the room felt alive. Mark's chest tightened. His heart pounded so loudly, he thought it might shatter his ribs. She's responding, the doctor said in a stunned tone. This is a very, very good sign. Mark brought his hands up to his face as tears emptied from his eyes. Not once caring who saw him. A man who had never cried in front of anyone now couldn't stop, because hope had just broken through the silence. The 20th day. On the 20th day, The morning air in the hospital felt different, warmer, filled with energy. The machine still hummed. The blinds let in a soft golden stream of sunlight. Nurses moved gently, careful not to disturb anything that might shatter the growing miracle. Mark stood by the window when he heard it. A breath, a groan, a whisper of sound that had not existed for nearly 3 weeks. He turned slowly. Jennifer's eyes were open, glass-like, confused, weak, but awake, truly awake. Mark didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. He just looked at her, afraid that even blinking might send her back into silence. When her eyes finally focused, they landed on him. "W, where am I?" she whispered. The sound of her voice was like music from another world. "You're safe?" Mark said softly, stepping closer. "You're in the hospital. You scared us." Tears slid down her temples into the pillow. My daughter," she murmured, panic rising instantly. "Jolie, where's my baby?" Mark pressed the call button. "Bring her in," he said urgently. Jolie had been waiting in the hallway, coloring quietly with one of the nurses, a habit she had picked up while waiting for news every day. When the door opened, she looked up and froze. Her crayon fell out of her tiny hand. "Mommy," she whispered. Jennifer turned her head slowly and saw her, the little girl she had thought she might never see again. The world's light walked back into her life in the smallest form. "Mommy, I'm here. I'm here." Jolie cried, rushing to the side of the bed, hugging her carefully, afraid to break her. Jennifer sobbed into her hair. "I thought I left you alone." "No, Mommy. I found help," she said excitedly. "I did what you said. I found someone important, and he saved you." Jennifer followed her pointing finger to Mark Henry, standing a few steps back. This was the first time she truly saw him, not as a rich man, not as a stranger, but as the person her daughter trusted with her life. "You saved my child," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Mark shook his head gently, stepping closer. "No," he said softly. "She saved me too." Jennifer blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "She reminded me of who I was before the world taught me to be hard," he said honestly. Tears filled her eyes. "Then I am in your debt forever." "You owe me nothing," he replied. "Just stay alive for her. That's more than enough." In that moment, the power dynamic disappeared. Billionaire and poor mother no longer mattered. There were only 3 humans in a room, stitched together by something far greater than wealth. Doctors called it a miracle. The medical staff could not explain the speed of Jennifer's sudden turnaround. Her recovery defied statistics. They had prepared for brain damage. They had prepared for permanent complications. But none came. By the 3rd day of consciousness, she was speaking freely. Within a week, she was walking slowly down the hospital halls, holding Jolie's hand in one hand and Mark's in the other. Nurses whispered, "Love saved her." And somehow, everyone believed it. Truths that had been hidden. One quiet afternoon in her private recovery room, Jennifer asked Mark a question that had been sitting inside her chest for days. "How long was I gone?" 19 days, he answered. "Who stayed with her?" Her eyes filled again with worry. "I did." "You barely know her." He smiled faintly. "She made sure I knew her very fast." Jennifer laughed weakly. "And where did she sleep?" "In my home." Fear flashed to her eyes for half a second, the instinctive fear of a poor mother in a harsh world. But then she saw his face. There was no harm there, only devotion. "You were never afraid?" she asked. He looked down at Jolie, who was sleeping curled up on the hospital chair. "She made me feel safer than my own security team ever has." Jennifer wiped tears from her cheeks. "All her life, I tried to protect her. And all this time she has been preparing to protect others," he replied. A mother's love recognized another truth. Her little girl had changed the course of a man's life. "That makes you family now," Jennifer whispered. Mark looked up at her, surprised by the word. Family, a word he never expected to hear attached to him again. "I would be honored to be part of yours." And just like that, they were no longer strangers. They were something else, something stronger. when the world learned. The media eventually found out. They always do. Headlines flooded screen after screen. Billionaire rescues unconscious single mother after 9-year-old daughter begs for help. Little girl's courage saves her mother and changes a CEO forever. But the real story wasn't a rescue. It was a bond. It was a transformation. It was a family that formed out of pure human connection. When Jennifer was discharged, a black luxury car waited at the entrance of the hospital. She stepped outside into the sun, holding her daughter. But she wasn't scared anymore. Mark stood beside her. "You'll never go back to that house," he said gently. "No heat, no food, no medicine." She lifted her chin with dignity. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," he smiled. "This is a continuation of a miracle that already started." Jolie squeezed both their hands. "We're a team now," she declared proudly. And for the first time in his life, Mark Henry believed her. If this miracle moved you, comment God is real, like and share the story, and subscribe now. Because when Jennifer steps into Mark's world, the people around him won't believe what happens next. The world Mark Henry had built was made of glass, steel, and silence. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble so polished it reflected the sky, security cameras in every corridor, assistants who moved like shadows, executives who spoke carefully around him, as if a wrong word could shatter a fortune. It was a world that had never known warmth, until Jolie and Jennifer Weston stepped into it. The black SUV rolled silently through the gates of Mark's private estate and curved into the massive driveway. The house that waited at the end of the road didn't look like a house at all. It looked like a modern palace carved from glass and stone. Jolie pressed her face against the window. "Mommy, is this a hotel?" she whispered, her voice filled with both excitement and fear. Jennifer swallowed hard, feeling wildly out of place in her simple clothes, her worn shoes, her nervous hands fidgeting in her lap. "No, baby," she replied carefully. "This is Mr. Henry's home." Jolie's eyes widened. "He lives here." Mark, watching him through the rearview mirror, smiled for the first time in days. "For now," he said softly. The car came to a slow stop. The doors opened. Cold, clean air kissed their faces as they stepped out. A team of staff waited at a respectful distance. Housekeepers, security, assistants. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved too quickly. Everyone had been warned. This is not a normal day. Jennifer stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the size, the beauty, the impossible contrast between this place and the tiny wooden couch she had nearly died on. "I don't belong here," she murmured. Mark stepped beside her so no one else could hear. "Do you know what I didn't belong in?" he said quietly. She looked up at him. "My empty life before you came into it." She said nothing in response, but her eyes softened. And then Jolie did what Jolie always did. She grabbed his hand. "Can I see my room now?" she asked, as if this all made perfect sense. The staff exchanged confused glances. Mark only smiled. "She's already making herself at home," he said. "That's more than I ever did." The first collision. Within the first 24 hours, the collision between Mark's world and Jennifer's reality shook every corner of his carefully controlled existence. The head chef in the massive kitchen nearly panicked when Jolie marched in and declared, "You're doing the sandwich wrong." "I'm sorry," he stammered. "You have to spread the peanut butter all the way to the edges or it tastes lonely," she explained seriously. The chef blinked. Mark burst into laughter. A laugh so real it startled everyone in the room. From that moment on, the staff realized something extraordinary had happened to their boss. He smiled. He talked more. He actually listened. But not everyone was pleased. By evening, Mark's chief financial officer, Richard Harlan, arrived unannounced. A man built from numbers, strategies, and suspicion. He stepped into the living room where Jennifer sat quietly on the sofa, watching Jolie color on the floor. His eyes moved over her slowly, calculating, judging. "Who is she?" he asked, not bothering with kindness. Mark didn't look up from his tablet. "She's Jennifer Weston, and that's her daughter, Jolie." "And why exactly are they here?" Richard pressed. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Mark finally looked up, slowly, deliberately, "Because I decided they would be." Richard's jaw clenched. That's not a business answer. Mark stood up. It's not a business situation. You can't just bring strangers into your personal residence and put the entire company at risk. Jolie looked up. Are we strangers? She asked innocently. Richard froze. The question hit him harder than an insult ever could. Mark placed a hand on her head. No, sweetheart, he said softly. You're not strangers. His voice turned cold when he looked back up at Richard. You are. Richard left without another word, but as the front door slammed shut, the walls began to whisper. Rumors, doubts, fear, confusion. A powerful man letting a poor woman and her child live inside his home? Something wasn't adding up, and the world around Mark Henry would not let it go easily. Jennifer's silent strength. Despite the luxury, Jennifer never acted entitled. She cleaned her own space. She offered to cook. She tried to earn her place in every little way. One night, she found Mark in his office staring at old photos on his desk. What are you looking at? She asked gently. My parents, he replied, before everything turned into money and meetings and loneliness. You loved them very much. Yes, and then I buried them. Jennifer's voice softened. And then you buried yourself too. He looked at her in surprise. That's exactly what I did, isn't it? Yes, she said, until a little girl decided you weren't allowed to stay buried anymore. He smiled sadly. You think I'm being saved. I think you're being reminded. Outside the glass walls of the mansion, the city lights blinked in the distance. Unaware that its most powerful man had just discovered the most important thing he would ever own, a purpose that could not be bought, the boardroom bombshell. The next morning, Mark summoned his executive board. 16 of the most powerful people in the region sat around a massive table filled with tablets, documents, and fear. Jennifer watched the scene from the hallway, with Jolie wrapped around her leg. He looks scary in there, Jolie whispered. He's not scary, Jennifer replied. He's fighting. Inside the boardroom, Mark stood tall. There will be changes, he said without greeting. Murmurs echoed. Our charity budget will triple. Murmurs grew louder. There will be a new foundation launched for emergency medical care for low-income families. Whisper spread, and the Weston initiative will be announced today. A hand slammed on the table. You can't name a foundation after someone you just met. Mark's eyes burned. I met humanity again through them. That qualifies more than most of your investments. You are risking public perception. No, he cut them off. I am finally correcting it. He paused, letting his words sink in. Anyone who has a problem with that can resign before I finish this sentence. Not a single person moved, because in that moment, they didn't see a billionaire anymore. They saw force. And still, the world was watching. Outside, paparazzi gathered. Headlines started forming even before the truth was confirmed. Who is the mystery woman living with CEO Mark Henry? Little girl seen holding billionaire's hand. Family or publicity stunt? Has wealth finally made him crazy? Jennifer watched television in silence. Maybe this was a mistake, she whispered. Mark turned the television off. No, he said firmly. The mistake was thinking my life was over before you ever showed up. Jolie skipped between them happily. We're not a mistake, she declared proudly. We're a miracle. In that moment, Mark Henry realized the real world was finally colliding with the empire he had built, and it wasn't breaking his world apart. It was rebuilding it into something real, something pure, something unbreakable. If this act touched your heart, comment, they belong together. Like plus share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe. Jennifer had lived most of her life believing the past was something that happened behind you, a dark hallway you walked away from, a door you closed, a chapter that couldn't follow you into the present. But she had learned something terrifying the moment she stepped inside Mark Henry's world. The past doesn't always stay where you left it. Sometimes it learns your address. The phone rang just after midnight. Mark stirred beside her in the quiet of the guest wing, half asleep, his security instinct still sharp even in peace. Jennifer reached for the phone hesitantly. No one ever called her anymore. Not friends. Not family. There had never been anyone left who cared enough to find her. Unknown number. Her heart began to beat faster. "Hello?" she whispered. There was a pause on the other line. Then a voice. Raspy. Familiar. Cold as memory. "Hello, Jenny." Her stomach dropped. Her fingers trembled. Nobody had called her that name since she had run away. "Nathan," she breathed. Mark sat up immediately. "Nathan who?" he asked quietly. But she said nothing. She couldn't, because she already knew he was standing on the other end of the line with the same power he had always held over her, and she had no idea how he had found her. "Did you miss me?" Nathan's voice mocked. "I saw you on the news. You clean up nice when a billionaire washes you off." "I don't know how you," she started. "Oh, I know everything," he interrupted. "About the house, about the girl, even about the little bed you almost died on." He chuckled. "And I know where you are right now." A chill ran through her entire body. The call disconnected. Jennifer sat in the dark, frozen. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel safe inside Mark's home. The next afternoon, the guards at the estate gate called in. "There's a man requesting entry. Says he knows one of the guests personally." Mark watched the camera feed, and Jennifer nearly collapsed. Standing behind the iron gates was a man she had buried in memory. Nathan Cole, the man who had once promised her love. The man who had once broken her body, broken her confidence, broken her voice. The biological father of Jolie. The man who never came back, until now. What does he want? Mark asked calmly. Jennifer's voice came out as a whisper. He wants control again. Mark didn't hesitate. "Do not let him through," he ordered the guards. But even from the screen, Nathan smiled like he already knew the answer. "Jennifer, you can't keep my child from me forever," his voice echoed faintly through the gate speakers. Jolie's head popped up. "Who is that, Mommy?" Jennifer's chest tightened. "A ghost, baby," she said quietly. "A ghost that shouldn't be here." Nathan raised his voice again. "I don't need permission to see my daughter." Mark stepped closer to the intercom. "You are not welcome on this property," he said coldly. "Leave." Nathan laughed. "You think money makes you a savior?" he sneered. "You think love erases blood?" His eyes narrowed. "She is mine." Those words ignited something violent inside Mark Henry. But it also ignited something far more dangerous. Fear. Because for the first time, he understood something painful. He wasn't just fighting for Jennifer and Jolie's future. He was about to fight their past. That night, Jennifer finally confessed everything. Not just bits. Not the softened version. Not the survival edited story. She told Mark about the nights locked inside tiny rooms, the hunger, the emotional abuse, the violence no one ever saw, the days she escaped while pregnant with Jolie, the years she spent hiding. "I thought if I stayed invisible long enough, he would forget I existed," she cried. "I thought he would die somewhere and disappear the way my hope did." Mark closed his eyes. "And now," he whispered, "now he knows I'm worth something, because you made me visible." She looked up at him, heartbroken. "I didn't mean to bring danger into your perfect life." Mark took her hands. "My life was never perfect," he said. "It was just well decorated." He leaned closer. "And no one, not even your past, is taking you away from me." It was the first time he had ever said something that close to a confession. And she felt it. He felt it. There was something in the air now. Something trembling and electric. But love wasn't the only thing rising. So was war. The letter arrived 2 days later. A legal notice. A formal request for temporary custody of Jolie Weston on a biological claim. Nathan was suing for rights. Mark read the document in silence. Each word dug into his chest. "This is how he wants to hurt us," Jennifer whispered. "By tearing her away." Mark stood up slowly. "He won't touch her." "You can't just by the court, Mark." "No," he said, "but I can protect my family." Family. The word echoed between them. There was no contract, no ring, no signature. But in that moment it was real. "She is my child too now," he said quietly. "No man with blood on his hands gets to claim her with paper. Outside, Jolie was playing the garden, unaware that the world was trying to rip her back into darkness. That innocent strengthened Mark. "I will bring everything he is into the light," he said, "and he will regret the day he tried to crawl out of your shadow." That night, Jennifer couldn't sleep. She watched Jolie breathe softly beside her, trusting the world again without knowing how cruel it had once been. "What if he wins?" she whispered into the dark. Mark's voice came from the doorway. "Then I will burn every system that allows monsters to hide behind law." She turned toward him. "You would do that for me?" "I would do that for her," he said. Then his voice softened. "And for you?" There was a pause. Silence thick. Electric. Honest. Mark crossed the room and placed a gentle hand over her heart. "This beats because you're alive. And as long as it does, no ghost is dragging you backwards." She looked up at him, the man who had started as a stranger in the snow, and finally saw clarity. He wasn't her rescuer anymore. He was her future, and he was willing to go to war to protect it. Outside, the sky darkened as clouds rolled in. A storm was forming, not in the weather. In a world that had finally discovered Jennifer and Jolie Weston were no longer invisible. They were protected, and the one who had once owned Jennifer's fear had just declared himself her enemy. If this act moved you, comment "The Past Won't Win," share and subscribe to support the story. The courtroom did not feel like a place of justice. It felt like a battlefield dressed in silence. Marble floors, high ceilings, polished wood, flags hanging like quiet witnesses. Everything looked clean, powerful, official, but Jennifer knew better. She had stood in places that looked safe before, and still walked out broken. Today wasn't just about legal papers. Today was about a name, Jolie Weston, and who had the right to claim it. Jennifer sat in the front row beside Mark, her hands folded on her lap, trembling beneath the table's polished surface. She could feel his presence, solid and grounded at her side, yet there was a storm raging inside him she had never seen before. Across the courtroom sat Nathan Cole, smiling, relaxed, wearing a suit bought with lies. He looked like a businessman, a concerned father, a man unjustly separated from his child. If strangers walked in and saw only the surface, they would never guess who he truly was. Jolie sat between two officials further back, legs swinging slightly, unaware of the magnitude of the moment. She held a small stuffed bear Mark had given her the night before. Courage, he had called the bear. Fitting. More than anyone else in that room, she was the bravest one there. Court is now in session. The gavel struck like thunder, and the war for Jolie's future began. Nathan's lawyer was the first to speak, a tall man with sharp eyes and a rehearsed voice. "Your Honor," he began, walking slowly before the court like a performer on stage. "My client, Mr. Nathan Cole, is the biological father of this child. He has recently located the child after years of separation and seeks nothing more than a right to be in her life." He gestured toward Jennifer. "Ms. Jennifer Weston has no current legal guardianship documentation. She has no stable residence of her own, no income history for several years, no established health care, no proof of consistent safety." Nathan looked over his shoulder and gave Jennifer a look that made her skin crawl, a smile that whispered, "I still own you in some way." And while we applaud Mr. Mark Henry for his charitable involvement, wealth does not qualify him to replace the legitimate father. Mr. Cole is ready to provide structure, discipline, and a stable future for his daughter. Nathan stood briefly. "I just want to know my child," he said gently. "I want to be the father she deserves." There were minor murmurs in the courtroom. Sympathy, doubt, curiosity. The same lies wrapped in a new package. Jennifer's hands clenched. How can lies wear expensive suits? She thought. Mark, however, didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't react. He simply listened, waiting, like a predator in stillness. Then his lawyer, Ms. Ortega, stood, and the air shifted. "Your Honor," Ms. Ortega said calmly, "we are not here to deny that Mr. Cole is the biological father." Nathan's expression brightened just slightly. "We are here to reveal exactly what kind of father he has been." She nodded to the side. The lights dimmed. A screen lit up. Footage played. Police reports. Emergency calls. Photographs taken quietly by neighbors years ago. Bruises on Jennifer's arms. The broken door. The recording of a young Jennifer crying while begging for help. Please, he's going to kill me. I'm pregnant. A gasp echoed in the courtroom. Jennifer squeezed her eyes shut as the old terror tried to crawl back into her veins. Mark's hand tightened around hers, anchoring her, holding her in the present. This court will see, Ms. Ortega continued, that Mr. Nathan Cole has multiple undocumented but verified incidents of abuse. That Jennifer Weston fled in fear for her life while pregnant. That Mr. Cole never attempted formal contact, child support, or search until national media exposed Ms. Weston and her daughter's connection to Mr. Henry. The screen changed again. A timeline. Years of absence. Years of silence. Then a sudden return only when the child became valuable. And may I remind the court, she said firmly, Mr. Henry did not seek this child. This child found him, in desperation, alone, frozen, praying for her mother's life. She turned to the judge. What kind of man ignores a crying child in the snow? Silence. The judge looked down at the file, then up at Nathan. Does the defense have a response? Nathan stood again, but the confidence had cracked. He shifted, sweated, adjusted his tie. I made mistakes, he said. That doesn't mean I am still that man. He turned suddenly toward Jolie. I'm your father, baby, he said, and I love you. The room went dead quiet, all eyes on the little girl, her small brow furrowed. She looked at him, stared for a long moment, then looked at Mark, then at her mother. Then she said the words that shattered everything. Fathers don't hurt mommies, and fathers don't disappear. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, shock, truth. No lawyer could argue against a child's instinct. The judge raised the gavel again. Order. But the damage was done. The truth had been spoken, and it was purer. The judge turned to Mark. You have gone to extraordinary lengths for this child. Why? He asked plainly. You are not her blood. You had no obligation. Mark stood slowly, every movement measured, every word intentional. Because no one else had, he said. He glanced toward Jolie. Because one night, a little girl chose bravery over fear. And when she grabbed my coat, I felt something I had never felt in my life. He looked back to the judge. Purpose. He turned his eyes to Nathan. You may be her blood, he said, voice low, powerful, but you are not a protector. Then he faced the court again. I am not asking for ownership. I am asking for permission to continue loving her and keeping her safe until her mother is fully capable again. He reached into his jacket. There is no contract inside this envelope. No condition. Only a promise. That child will never cry in the cold again. He placed it on the desk. And she will never be afraid of a man again. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Sacred. The judge removed his glasses. Studied Jennifer. Then Jolie. Then Mark. Then Nathan. Finally, he spoke. Biology does not define a parent. Love, safety, stability, and consistent presence do. He lifted the gavel. Mr. Nathan Cole, your request for custody is denied. Nathan lurched back. This isn't over, he shouted. But no one listened anymore. The gavel slammed down. Full guardianship returns to Jennifer Weston. Temporary joint protection granted to Mark Henry under court supervision. No contact order enforced against Mr. Cole effective immediately. Jolie jumped up. Mommy, she cried, running to Jennifer's arms. Mark stood there, stunned. The room blurred around him, not from stress, but from something stronger. Relief, emotion, love. Jennifer looked up at him through tears. You didn't just save her, she said. You redeemed us both. But deep inside, Mark knew something else. This battle wasn't the end. Because as the camera zoomed in on Nathan's clenched fists, there was one unmistakable truth burning in his eyes. He had not lost his obsession, only his power. And men like him often become most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. Comment blood doesn't mean love. If you stood with Mark like, and share if you believe protection is stronger than fear, and subscribe. The snow came again the morning it happened. But this time it didn't feel cold. It fell softly, like a memory deciding to change its ending. The flakes drifted past tall windows of the Henry estate, settling against the glass like tiny white feathers whispering to the world that something sacred was about to take place. Inside the house, the air was warm, not just from the heat in the walls, but from a new kind of life that had slowly wrapped itself around the once silent halls. Mark Henry stood at the top of the grand staircase, hands resting on the polished rail, watching as Jolie ran down the tiled hallway with a level of freedom she had never known. Her laughter echoed through the wide corridors, bouncing between pillars, invading corners that had only ever known stillness. It was a sound the house had never heard before, a sound Mark had never heard before. Joy unbought. For the first time in 47 years of existence, Mark Henry did not feel like the owner of a mansion. He felt like a father standing in a home. Jolie ran to the base of the stairs and turned in a circle, her arms stretched wide, face lifted toward the falling snow beyond the windows. "Mr. Mark," she shouted, "it's magic snow. It doesn't hurt." Mark smiled. "You know," he said quietly, stepping down toward her, "snow is just water that decides to fall in a different form." She looked up at him. "Then I think I'm snow," she said proudly, "because I'm different now, too." Her words landed deeper than she could ever understand, because she was right. They all were. Jennifer stood in the kitchen, watching the two of them through the archway. She held a steaming mug in her hands. Her strength returned, her eyes no longer shadowed by sickness or fear. She was not the woman who had once faded on that old couch in a broken apartment. She was not the woman who had rationed medicine to keep her child fed. She was no longer the voice trembling in the dark. She was alive, strong, reborn, and, perhaps for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Behind her hung documents that had just been finalized that very morning. Official papers with her name printed boldly. Jennifer Weston, property manager, Henry Living Division, health care included, housing secured, education support for Jolie guaranteed. Not charity, not pity, opportunity, given with dignity. She turned and walked out into the hall, watching as Mark knelt down to help Jolie tie her shoelaces. He had once hired people to do everything, filled boardrooms with voices, commanded nations of money. Yet here was a billionaire CEO kneeling in front of one little girl, lips slightly pursed in concentration, fingers clumsy with laces, determined to get it right. A tear slipped down Jennifer's cheek. "You never learned how to tie shoes, did you?" she teased softly. Mark glanced up. "Shoes aren't designed for men like me. They usually come already tied by people I pay." Jolie giggled. "Well, I'll teach you," she said, "because family teaches family." Something shifted inside Mark, deep in the place where loneliness once lived. Family. He stood as Jennifer approached. For a moment, it was just silence between them, full of things they hadn't said yet. "You don't owe us any of this," she said quietly. "Not the house, not the job, not the protection." Mark shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "I owe myself this. I spent my whole life building walls of glass and steel, investing in buildings that never loved me back. You too," he glanced at Jolie, now twirling in her boots. "You didn't come asking for my money. She came asking for help." His eyes met Jennifer's, and in the process, she gave me a life I didn't know was missing. Silence again. Different now. Not cold. Not lonely. Peaceful. Outside the gate, just beyond the line of the long, winding driveway, a car sat quietly. A pair of eyes watched through a dirty windshield. Nathan Cole. He had been banned from within miles of the property, but distance didn't kill obsession. It only sharpened it. He watched Jolie through the distant glass panel of the front door. Saw her smile. He watched Mark laugh with her. Saw Jennifer's hand rest lightly against Mark's arm as they spoke. A family he had never been able to build. And hatred twisted inside him like a disease. "She should be mine," he muttered. "That man stole my life." His phone buzzed. A message from his lawyer flashed across the screen. "Drop it. You lost. Let it go." Nathan laughed. A dry, broken sound. "Men like Mark Henry don't understand something," he whispered. eyes still locked on the child. Snow always melts, and when it does, things change. He turned the key. The engine faded, and for now he disappeared. But fate had already chosen the ending of the story. 1 month later, sunlight washed over the skyline as a large crowd gathered in front of one of Mark Henry's newest developments, a community housing project for struggling mothers and children. Press cameras flashed. Journalists whispered with curiosity. On a tall banner above the building entrance was a name that no one expected: the Jolie Weston Foundation for Family Stability, built to provide food, shelter, medical care, jobs, hope. Mark stood at the podium. Jennifer stood beside him. Jolie sat in the front row, swinging her legs proudly in a brand new yellow dress. Most people think wealth comes from numbers, Mark began, from zeros and commas in bank accounts. But I have recently learned that true wealth walks up to you in the snow with tear-filled eyes and a brave heart. The crowd grew silent. He pointed gently toward Jolie. That little girl saved not only her mother's life, but mine as well, because she forced me to remember what it means to be human. He then turned to Jennifer. And this woman taught me that strength doesn't come from power, but from love that refuses to die, even when the world tries to bury it. He paused, emotion gripping his voice. This foundation is not a symbol of charity. It is a symbol of rebirth. The crowd erupted. Applause, tears, whispers of inspiration rippled like waves. Jennifer knelt and pulled Jolie into her arms. "You did this," she whispered. "No," Jolie replied. "We did." She looked up at Mark. "Your family, too." Mark stepped down from the stage and knelt in front of her. "For the rest of my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that will be the greatest title I ever hold." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny gold snowflake-shaped pendant. "I had this made for you. So you remember something." Jolie's eyes widened. "What?" "That snow doesn't have to be cold," he whispered. "Sometimes it turns to gold." He placed it around her neck. The crowd melted. The cameras caught it. And at that exact moment, the sky, which had been clear minutes before, released a single soft snowfall, golden under the sunlight. A sign, a miracle, a promise. The day the snow turned to gold. That night, in her warm bed, Jolie looked up at the ceiling and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, God, for making my mommy wake up, for sending Mr. Mark, and for giving me a new life." Jennifer stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. Mark appeared beside her. "Well," he asked quietly. "She's finally dreaming again." Jennifer smiled. "So am I," he replied. And as they turned off the light, one truth filled the dark. This wasn't the story of a billionaire, or a poor girl, or even a broken mother. It was the story of how love, in its smallest form, can change the entire world. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for power. She only asked him to care. And in that moment, a billionaire became a father, a mother came back to life, and a broken world found its heart again. Comment: Snow to Gold. If this story touched your heart, like and share. So this message travels further. Subscribe to Billionaire's Enclave for more powerful stories of transformation, love, and legacy.